Hello, today in our Wheelbarrow Series class, we're going to talk about growing lavender in Kentucky. Welcome. I am Dennis Morganson, Agent for Horticulture Education here in Washington County. Lavender, or lavandula, which is the common name is lavender, is a genus of 47 known species of flowering plants in the mint family, which are Lamiaceae. Mint family plants generally have a square stem, so a lot of plants that you see with square stems are in that mint family. They are native to Cape Verde and the Canary Islands, across Europe, northern and eastern Africa, the Mediterranean, southwest Asia to southeast India. Many members of the genus are cultivated for culinary use, essential oils, traditional medicine, and cosmetics. And there is a disclaimer here, there is no high quality clinical evidence that lavender has any effects on disease or improves health. However, they are used for those things. Description of the plant. The genus also includes annuals and short-lived herbaceous perennial plants, short shrub-like perennials, and subshrubs or shrubs. Leaf shape is variable across the genus, including simple pinnately toothed or pinnate, and sometimes multiple pinnate and dissected. Most of the species of lavender have leaves that have tiny hairs that contain the essential oils, which is what we use in the cosmetic industry and for smells and flavorings and those kinds of things. Flowers are borne on whorls held above the foliage, and they can range in colors, including lavender, which is where the plant gets its name, and also blue, violet, lilac, blackish purple, and even a yellowish form. There are two types of lavenders that grow well in Kentucky. The first is Lavandula angustifolia, or English lavender. It's hardy to zone 5 and often blooms twice in one season. Kentucky ranges in zones from 6, 6B, and some 7 out in the western parts of the state and in the inner city of Louisville. There are hundreds of varieties of English lavender available depending on the color and size of the plant that you desire. Second lavender grown in Kentucky is a hybrid of Lavender angustifolia and Lavender latifolia. It's commonly referred to as lavandin. Lavandins are generally larger plants that bloom only once late in the summer or produce sterile seed. The lavandins produce larger quantities of the essential oil, but there's not as high quality as the English lavenders produce. Both types of the lavenders have a place in landscapes and is a nice cash crop. The second one here, the hybrid, usually does a little better in Kentucky and has a larger bloom, a taller bloom on it than some of the English lavenders do. There are also French and Spanish lavenders, but they're not cold hardy enough to live in Kentucky. We can grow those here as annuals. You can put them in containers and you can put them in outdoor beds. I kind of like the flower on these. You can see the little petal sticks up off the top of the whorl of flowers there. It's kind of a neat addition to that flower spike. When you plant your lavender, it can be planted from spring through fall in Kentucky. There has been some research done at the New Mexico State that says that fall plant lavender survives better, it establishes more quickly, and produces more flowers the following season. Here in Kentucky, that's going to depend on a lot of factors, especially how wet we get and how cold and how quickly we get cold in the fall. Choosing the size of plant depends on when planting will occur. Obviously, a fall plant lavender should be in 4-inch or larger size pots with an established root system. This larger root system will help make sure that the plant actually survives the winter. If it's spring plant lavender, you can plant smaller plants as they have the long season to get established, and they don't have to depend on the root ball that they've got to actually make it through the winter. When planting your lavender, they do prefer full sun. They also like an alkaline soil, which is a pH of anywhere from 7 up to 7.5. They don't need very much organic matter, very little in fact. Heavy soils are the problem for us here in Kentucky. They do not like our heavy wet clay soil, especially in the winter. So we got to make sure we have really good drainage when planting a lavender. It's a good idea to go ahead and mix in an inch or two of the medium coarse or small coarse bark that you can buy for mulch and just till that into the top 6 to 8 inches of your soil. You can also add some rock to it if you would like. I prefer to do the bark. It's just organic matter and it's easier to work with. Just be careful if you have a heavy clay soil that you don't add sand or something like that to it, because then you're going to make concrete. It's also a good idea if you know you've got a little bit wetter soil, even if you do mix in the bark and some of the other thicker organic matter to help it drain, If you plant on a mound or kind of a hill, you'll get better drainage, and that is really important in the wintertime because usually we lose lavender plants in Kentucky. It's not from freezing out, it's not from drought, it's from root rot because of the heavy wet soils. When planting lavender as a crop, your spacing depends on the size of the cultivars and usually ranges from 2 to 3 feet within the row and 3 to 6 feet between the rows. Lavender is not competitive and it does not respond well to weed pressure, so you're going to have to make sure that you keep that weed pressure down. If you're growing lavender in a field, it's always a good idea to put some landscape fabric in between your rows. That'll keep the weeds down and weed barrier. You could also do this in a landscape bed if you know you're going to have trouble keeping the weeds down. You can always put some landscape fabric down and then put some mulch over that. Even though lavender is drought tolerant, it does have to have adequate supplemental irrigation for optimum establishment, getting the plant started, obviously, and also for satisfactory landscape quality and maximum production of a nice looking plant. You're going to have to water these if we have a drought. In general, you want to water once or twice a week immediately after planting until the plants are established. If you plant in the spring, that's probably not going to be as big an issue because we have a lot of spring rains, but if you plant in the fall, you're definitely going to have to keep up with that watering. Water mature plants every 2 to 3 weeks until your bud formation, then once a week until harvest depending on weather. The use of landscape fabric with mulch will also cut down on your water requirements here. You want to apply rock or bark mulch over the landscape fabric, but away from the crown. That's very important. That crown cannot stay wet, cannot be covered because it will rot. You also can use that fabric row cover around the plants and then put that rock or mulch around that. That will help protect that plant during the winter, that from heaving from the soil, and also from cold wind and maybe even some sub-zero freezing temperatures if we were to have that again. If you want to propagate lavender, the best time to take cuttings from lavender is right after they've bloomed. You take cuttings from stems with no flower buds on them. You want to remove the leaves off the bottom half of the cutting and insert it into a well-draining sterile potting soil or horticultural vermiculite, which you can buy those at any of the garden stores. Rooting hormone is not necessary. You do want to be sure that the cuttings are labeled as to cultivar name and date the cuttings were collected. You want to water well and then mist regularly. They should root in about 3 weeks. It's a good idea to go ahead and put like a little plastic bag over those and set them in indirect sunlight. That'll help keep the moisture up on those. They should, again, root in about 3 weeks. You can transplant your rooted cuttings into 2 to 4 inches in pots, 2 to 4 inch pots. Once the plants have developed a vigorous root system, they can be planted in the garden. Just know you can plant them if they are in containers anytime outside, especially during the growing season because they can establish during the growing season and develop a nice big root system before fall. Lavender responds well to pruning. It flowers on new growth, so plants should be pruned every year after it's established. If you don't, you'll get less and less flowers in a big woody plant. Pruning should take place when the green leaves start to emerge from the base of the plant in the spring. You want to remove approximately 1/3 of the top of the rest of the plant. Pruning keeps the plant from splitting open and from becoming too woody. A too woody plant will not flower well. Here's a graphic here from the spruce. It just shows you how to prune your lavender. You want to prune back all your shoots by 1/3. That's even before or after flowering. It's best to prune in the spring after flowering, but if you can't do that, you can do it a little later. Pruning heavily each year will slow down the formation of that woody growth you can see there, and you do not want to cut below that base of woody growth because you may damage the crown of the plant and not get regrowth after that. Harvest lavender stems in the morning hours when the oils are the most concentrated and when approximately 50% of the flower buds have opened. You can use a sickle or pruning shears to cut stems or as long as possible. You form bundles of 50 to 100 stems and secure them with rubber bands. The rubber bands will contract. That way when the stems dry out, they'll still be tight. Dry the harvested lavender in a cool, dark place where there's good air circulation. A barn or a building or something like that that has good air circulation but is out of indirect sun is a great location to dry lavender. Lavender does have very few pest or disease problems, but the number one problem is going to be soil-borne diseases such as Phytophthora, which is root rot. That is from being in too wet a soil. So again, we have heavy wet clay soils in Kentucky, so you're going to want to raise that up and add some loose organic matter to keep that where it'll drain better. Do not overwater again, or allow that let water stand around your plants. You can also get some heavy infestations of grasshoppers during the growing season, which can reduce your yield and your flowering. And then in some areas, and most areas of Kentucky, we do have them. Deer can damage or trample your browse, your lilac plant. So if you know you've got a lot of deer pressure, you're going to have to keep an eye on those and maybe do something to keep those out. Lavender is used for a lot of things, but lavender oil is probably the most popular. Commercially, the plant is grown mainly for this essential oil. English lavender yields an oil with a sweet overtone and can be used in balms, salves, perfumes, and cosmetics. And topical applications. Lavandula intermedia is also known as lavandin. That's the one we talked about earlier, which was the cross. It does produce a lot of essential oil, but it is not a high level quality as the English is. It has a lot higher levels of terpenes and camphor, which add a sharper overtone to the fragrance. The lavandins are widely cultivated for commercial use as well. Since their flowers tend to be bigger than those of English lavender, the plants tend to be easier to harvest. Again, though, the lavender oil is just not as good as the English lavender. Lavender is also grown for the phytochemicals that the plant produces. There's some 100 individual phytochemicals that have been extracted from lavender oil. Some of the major contents are linalool acetate, which is 30 to 55%, linalool, tannins, and caryophyllene. A lot of these things are used in a lot of cosmetics and cleaners and different products that are on the market. The extracts of lavandula and angustifolia essential oil have various pharmaceutical effects as well, such as anticonvulsants, anxiolytics, antioxidants, a lot of those other things, even some antimicrobial and antifungal activities. Culinary lavender is usually English lavender. It's the most commonly used in cooking. Angustifolia, Lavandula angustifolia or Munstead is the variety, which is very common, which grows very well here in Kentucky. It has a sweet aromatic fragrance with a lemon or citrusy note. It is used as spice or condiment in pastas, salads, and dressings, and desserts. The buds and greens are used in teas, and honeybees can make a monofloral honey known as lavender honey from this variety. The buds and the flowers are used for cooking as well. For most cooking applications, the dried buds, which are also referred to as flowers, are used. Lavender greens have a more subtle flavor when compared to rosemary. The potency of lavender flower increases with drying, which necessitates more sparing, used to avoid a heavy, soapy aftertaste. Chefs note to reduce by 2/3 the dry amount in the recipes, which call for fresh lavender buds. So keep that in mind. If you dry your lavender, you're going to use less of it, about 2/3 than if you were using fresh. Lavender buds can amplify both sweet and savory flavors in dishes and are sometimes paired with sheep's milk and goat's milk cheeses. Lavender flowers are occasionally blended with black, green, and herbal teas as well. Lavender flavors baked goods and desserts, pairing especially well with chocolate. In the United States, both lavender syrup and dried lavender buds are used to make lavender scones and even marshmallows. Lavender buds are put into sugar for 2 weeks to allow the essential oils and fragrance to transfer, making lavender sugar. Then the sugar itself is used in baking, and that imparts that lavender flavor with the sugar. Lavender can be used in breads. Recipes calls for rosemary. Lavender can be used decoratively in dishes or spirits as decorative and aromatic in a glass of champagne. It's also used in savory dishes, giving stews a reduced sauces and aromatic flair. It's also used to scent flans, custards, and even sorbets. The greens of lavender is dried, and they're similarly used as rosemary, or combined with rosemary to flavor meat and vegetables in savory dishes. They can also be used to make a tea that is a milder tea than what is made with the flower. So if the flower tea is too strong, you can try to make a tea with the leaves and see if you like that a little bit better. So that was a quick rundown on growing lavender in Kentucky. It is not a hard plant to grow, although most people think it is. The main thing is to, if you have wet soil, raise that area up, add some bark to that soil and mix it in where it will drain better. And that's the biggest key, is to keep these plants from drowning in the winter. Usually our lavender plants in Kentucky drown from too much water in the winter and they get root rot and then they die. So you can put them on a mound or put them in a place that drains really well. You're going to be very successful. The English lavender, again, one of the best varieties you can grow is Munstead, which you talked about that earlier. So if you have any questions about growing lavender, you can give me a call at the Washington County Extension Office at 859-336-7741.